and Snap Research and a bunch of different things in image generation and computer vision. And Wayne was leading product and design at Smule. So both of them had worked around advertisers and creators, and were really obsessed with this idea of the camera and the ability to create content that was AI driven and much easier for consumers and businesses. So when they started HeyGen, they really start with the premise of what would it take for us to generate video that's, Sarah and Pranav or Demetrius or any of us speaking perfectly out of the box with consumer quality input and full flexibility. And I think that is a hugely ambitious problem statement, but the speed of the team, besides, we just talked about research and domain understanding, is something that really stands out to us. The cycle time from new idea because a customer brought it to us or because somebody just thought it'd be cool to in the product is the best I've ever seen in a company. Demi and Chenlin are the co-founders of a company called Pika Labs in the video editing and also generation space, though different type of content. And they had been Stanford researchers publishing and working with companies in the areas of 3D and image generation and video understanding. And their problem was very personal. They had tried to create a short film together, but they're not filmmakers. And even though they had ideas, the execution was incredibly hard. And so even despite all of the supposedly AI-powered video tools that existed out there today. And then Brett and Clay come from Google, and Brett was very recently CEO of Salesforce. At Salesforce, Brett really understood how customers, large brands were struggling to interact with customers at the quality and scale level that they wanted to. And he'd also a long time ago, been CTO of Facebook. I think many of us have used frameworks and open source components from Facebook in that era, such as React, and their ability to marry the customer need around these high quality, safe support interactions and the modularity of understanding, like, how do I build a system that can serve multiple customers that isn't custom every time, I think is some of the reason that makes Sierra great. One of the things that you'll notice about all of these companies is, the products that they have released are all like a year or so, a year and a half or less old, right? And so the fact that they all have really interesting traction and user love at this stage just speaks to the velocity. And I think that's really important in this era, just given the pace of progress in the research field overall and how dynamic our understanding is, as Pranav mentioned, of the product surfaces and interfaces. Being able to leverage the sort of joint learnings of the community of builders, open source or even amongst different startups and larger companies is something that is going to benefit people with the most velocity. The final thing I'll mention here is just to talk a little bit about how dynamic I think the overall business model of some of these AI applications is and some of the considerations there. Here, I'm showing a slide from one of the Snowflake earnings calls. And it's a slide that is very common in earnings and financial statements for SaaS and cloud infrastructure companies. And besides the fact that Snowflake is massive, you could squint your eyes at the last column here, their target operating model, and say like, oh, that's a great SaaS business, any great SaaS business. 78% gross margins, 25% operating margins, generates 30% free cash flow. That's what we all want to get to. But and Snowflake actually has, like, of course, more compute cost than most. But I think it's a lot less clear what each new AI company looks like on both the revenue and cost side, right? So if we talk about revenue, when we are doing generations, the traditional seat-based pricing that has been dominant in SaaS or consumption-based pricing that has been dominant in infrastructure is, it's not clear that that's quite right? If you're replacing work, do you really want to be charging by seats if somebody doesn't need to grow their team? If you are pricing per generation, what do you do about the fact that some generations are far more valuable than others, and generations are more valuable to some teams than others and some use cases than others? It's certainly not the highest value capture pricing model from the company perspective. And I think the sort of holy grail of the business model and pricing model for AI companies is whether or not you can really replace services. For example, video editing, and then charge like you're replacing for services instead of paying an agency. For example, you pay one of these companies for their tool, but you have the gross margins and sort of cost profile of a software company. On the cost side, everybody, I think, has thought about the cost of training and data acquisition here. But if the name of the game in venture-backed companies traditionally has been capital efficiency, this is a really new dynamic, right? And thinking about how you can get to lower risk with your initial product market fit, how you can get the business itself to pay for training and data acquisition, how you can do partnerships or otherwise be efficient, I think is a major thing that we think about. And then in the long term, projecting what the cost of inference or the cost of foundation models or even human in the loop for quality for some companies is a major consideration. And it has huge implications for the product decisions you make, depending on what the projections you have are of these different cost curves, right? So if I think that there's going to be another magnitude decrease in price and latency for the capabilities we have today over the next year or two, I might be willing to chain together many more calls or sample many more outputs than I would otherwise. And the type of system and user experience that I create can be very different. So if we just go back to the framework we had at the beginning of, every great young company, actually any company, but we just think about startups more, needs to have these foundational pieces: market positioning, strategy, a product strategy, team, and business quality. We think there are elements that are unique to each of them in the age of AI. So just to sort of summarize that, it's customer back, not capability forward thinking, despite our enthusiasm about all of these new capabilities. We think the biggest opportunity is around category creation, not joining of existing categories. And that our definition of software 3.0 is systems designed to manipulate these foundation models for use. Everyone here knows that putting AI in production, making users happy, is non-trivial. And the way we think of it is really that AI applications are GPT wrappers in the way that SaaS companies are database wrappers, right? Salesforce started operating on Oracle, but that is not, now it's much more valuable company than Oracle. But that's not what made Salesforce great. It was a component that was critical and eventually replaced, actually. So we'll see what happens with foundation models. But it was the data model, the business logic, the ability to standardize an entire persona within many companies, the sales rep, around their workflows, and then uniquely good distribution, all of the other parts of company building and software that made Salesforce great. And we think that analogy applies really well to the software 3.0 era. We talked a little bit about the dimensions that make teams uniquely good in this time period. And we think that's actually a huge opportunity for anyone who's leaning into AI. I like the joke of, the year the iPhone comes out or the year after the iPhone comes out, every enterprise, every startup is hiring somebody with 5 years of mobile experience. It's not clear to me that 5 years of machine learning, like classical machine learning experience, is that useful in an era where everything is changing so much. But the extra 20 hours a week manipulating models and thinking about these system design choices, we think is really differentiated. And then I think that people run into both huge opportunities and huge challenges on the business quality side as things look a little bit less like standard SaaS. So this is inning, I think, 2 in the AI revolution. It's happening really, really quickly, and a lot of you are at the center of it. We would love to hear if you are starting companies or want to talk about any of the ideas we mentioned here or online, and look forward to seeing everything you guys all build. Thank you.
Excellent. Woo! So the chat is blowing up right now. We got to address some of these questions, and I will let everyone formulate your questions. Take your time. I have a few questions from that, because this is like, I really appreciate you going into some of these pieces that you need to think about as you are putting AI into production, specifically when it comes to costs and ROI of using AI in production. I think things get really tricky, especially when you're leaning on a third party model provider, right? And one thing that I've constantly been asking others is how they look at the cost of goods and being able to add that extra cushion on top if you're going to have to be scaling when you're making more. The more you scale, the more API calls you're using for OpenAI and things like that. So do you think about those business models as being more fragile, or is that just like MVP one, and then eventually you're going to go to your own model and roll it in house, and then it's not going to be as expensive, but you also still have to look at the cost of like the engineers that know how to do this stuff and the actual like GPUs and all that fun stuff. So it was more of a ramble on my part, but I'd love to hear how you all look and think about that.
Yeah, I can start, and Pranav, please jump in. We showed, so first I would show, I would say that we see a design pattern pretty commonly within some of the more mature AI native companies, where even if they need a GPT-4 for certain capabilities within the product, that's often not the full set of things they're doing, right? And so one pattern we see is they start with that, and they're pretty cost insensitive as they're trying to understand what capabilities they can deliver to the end user and sort of where the bounds of the state of the art are today. And then they, for example, might write an intent classifier or figure out how to direct certain user queries to cheaper and smaller models. It's not clear you should really be using GPT-4 for certain types of, for example, like simple summarization, right? And that you might care to use an off-the-shelf model, fine-tune something, distill something, and get better latency and performance characteristics. So what we tend to see is actually like some sort of classification or orchestration across a whole range of models over time. And I think that was kind of what you were alluding to. Do we see them as more fragile? I think it's really hard to predict with like certainty that like there's just one way to build these companies. We do have friends with companies at it's not all, they're not AI native companies, right? But $100 million plus ARR companies with tens of millions of dollar AI business lines. And it's all API providers, right? So it's really just like, do you have the pricing power where your user values what you're offering more than a multiple of the API costs over time? And I think we also have a prediction to some degree because of things like Mistral and Llama that costs will continue to go down over time. And super thankful to all the providers for that.
Yeah, I think we've empirically seen a lot of that happen. And part of that is also the larger inference providers are also reducing their own costs. And some of that is decreasing cost of GPUs. There's rumors that GPT 3.5 Turbo is a substantially smaller model than 3.5. And I think all of that makes it much more possible to offer inference or almost intelligence at a discount.
So there are a ton of questions coming through here in the chat. I'm going to have to do the hard job of just choosing a few of them. I think one is pretty interesting from Lauren. How are you all thinking about the cost of inference?
I assume this means like self-hosted or platform-hosted inference of open source or fine-tuned or your own pre-trained models. So one of the things that's encouraging here is how much you can move the needle on inference, right? And so if that is people who are writing their own, like this takes a lot of work, so I don't think it's going to be most people, including most applications at scale. But we do have companies where like half the company is devoted to inference optimization upfront, right? Because they want to offer something that is going to be consumer facing or just needs to be cheap and fast. I also think that one of the things that Pranav was pointing out earlier was just we see increasing maturity through the stack. And so you have companies like Base 10 and others where the entire team is dedicated to making inference faster and cheaper. And like you can write an entire pipeline for that. And so I guess my view is I would want teams to have an understanding of the order of magnitude cost of what they are doing. But I would even claim like we'll invest in things that are gross margin negative now if people like from an inference cost perspective, if people expect that to cross over at some point, we think it's a reasonable plan because we do think these capabilities are going to get cheaper, and like you can ride on the benefit of other people's technical work over time.
Fascinating. Okay, cool. So how about this as far as a pricing plan? Because I imagine you've seen pretty much a classic scenario, like you were saying, like there are now patterns emerging when it comes to pricing also on when you're building apps on top of these models. And so have you seen it make sense to do a pricing system like a prepaid phone provider type thing? Or is it all just like kind of consumption and as you go, you pay?
Oh, we have companies that do like packs, right? As you
Yeah.
described, like prepaid phone provider. I don't know what the right answer is here yet. I described some of the challenges, and I think there is a lot of innovation. I guess what I would like to see happen, if possible, is like pricing for a service at some massive discount to the human version of that service. That really is, you know, in enterprise sales, there is this concept today of value-based pricing. And it is essentially like, can you figure out how to scale negotiation with each customer based on the value of their use case? That's really tough, but companies make a lot more money that way, right? Because, for example, let's just try like an example of if I can take in all of the inputs that your researchers have done, and researchers like, I don't know, like economics researchers in a think tank or something, and then generate a report for you, and you usually charge $20,000 a pop for the consumers of that report. That generation, like that handful of API calls or that system output is worth a lot more than like I generated something for a student, right? Even if the product is essentially the same. And so I think there should be more experimentation around the pricing models here. And that could be packs, it could be consumption, or it could be differentiation by use case.
So that's fascinating because it's like really coming down to what's the biggest opportunity. It's the same, as you were saying, it's almost like it's the same product, maybe tweaking it a little bit, but the hard part is the same product, right? It's just going after the bigger value add and going after what you can charge more for, which ultimately will give you more success.
Yeah, and Demetrius, one of the things that I think is often uncomfortable for entrepreneurs or product leaders is to say, like, we're going to position our product as only being applicable to this one thing, right? Versus like all the user segments it could actually serve. And like, I want to be ambitious too, right? Like, we're not here to restrict your ambitions, but I think the trade-off is like some of your customer segments are way more willing to pay than others. And
Yes.
like, it's really hard to advertise two prices on the website, right?
Yes. Yeah, of course. Going back to that example of if you're creating a report, you're creating a report for a student who's not going to pay 20 grand, or you're creating a report for a analyst who goes and sells it, and they're going to pay that 20 grand because it's much more important for them and they can make more money off the back end when they go and sell it. So so it's like niching down so much to recognize that you have this segment that values what you're doing so much more that they're willing to pay for it. Okay, so I love this. I want to keep going because there are a few more questions, and then we're going to rock and roll with our next keynote of the day. But there is a really cool question in here from Thomas asking about, for the both of you, what have you learned in the last 3 months which changed your view on how to build businesses in the future?
Um, It's a pretty broad question. I think a lot of what we discussed in presentation is kind of what we've learned over the last year of looking at AI companies. Maybe if we scope down to the last 3 months, I think one thing that we've been thinking about is the quality of API and inference businesses. And so part of the question that we've been talking about so far is where do we think value accumulates in this chain? Like, do we think that this was, I think, the hot question at the beginning of last year is which of the large section of AI stack accumulates value? I think in many ways, it's a little silly. We think that all parts of the stack have ways of capturing some of the value that they create. But one thing that we've been thinking about is like, where is the specialization or intelligence lie? So to, I think your point, Demetrius, that you were making before, if I have two different product segments, how do I pick between them? We still think that a lot of the value is in workflow. Determining what the product surface looks like that people in some specific vertical want to engage with is difficult and requires deep customer empathy and understanding and spending time in domain.
One thing I would add to this in terms of, it's not 3 months ago, but is a handful of months, is we were seed investors in Mistral. So we made the bet and like we thought that they could do really interesting things with only $100 million or only $500 million, right? But it still surprised me how effective smaller models can be, right? Like I think it's a different view of, I mean, who better to tell us that scaling laws are not quite what we thought than guys who worked on scaling laws? And so I think that changes my view of what is possible from a user experience perspective and how many people should really be fine tuning this year.
That's awesome. That is very true. And the idea of these smaller models and also bringing them more locally, I think is a huge trend that we've been seeing. And that I think it's only going to continue because at the end of the day, for your business case, you probably don't need it to write a poem in the style of Bob Dylan. You just need it to do what you need it to do as well as it possibly can for you to make sure that it gets out into production and you can trust it. And so thank you, Sarah and Pranav. This has been awesome. For everyone that wants more of Sarah and Pranav, check out the No Priors podcast. You've already got some fans that were saying in the chat they love the podcast. I'm so grateful that you both came on here. We got a 2-for-1 special for the first talk of this session. We're kicking it off right. Thank you both. And
thank you to the amazing community. Thanks, Demetrius.
See you all. Have a great day. And now we're just going to keep rolling because that's what we do. We've got a lot of talks to get through. And now it is talk number 2. I'm ready. I am so ready for Shreya. Where are you at, Shreya? There you are.
Hey, hi, Demetrios. Long time.
I'm so excited for this. I heard a little birdie told me that you have something special to tell us about in this session, but I'm not going to be a spoiler. I am going to let you get after it and go ahead and talk. For those that do not know Shreya, she's a friend of the community. She's doing awesome work when it comes to guardrails. Check out that open source project. If you have not seen it, I'll drop a link in the chat. And Shreya, the floor is yours. Do you want to share your screen or anything?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
Let me start. All right. Can you see my screen or?
Nope, not yet. But while you're doing that, I'm going to let everybody know, I'm just going to narrate something real fast.
Yes.
That guardrails and the inspiration, or guardrails was one of the big inspirational pieces for me when I created our most recent song, actually our first song, which I've been threatening to create for ages. And so I created this song called Prompt Templates. And there's a part in there that's like, these models are toxic. And so, all right, so you gotta do a little fun technical piece. All right, come right back.
I'll be back in like a second. Yeah,
exactly. In the meantime, I'll tell people about these models are toxic, and I'm just gonna let them know. I think the best way of doing it is I'm just gonna go ahead and let you all check out a bit of this song. You may have heard it, but here we go. This is the song that I created. We've got Shreya coming up, folks. Get ready for it. Are you back, Shreya? Is it working? credit for toxic. These models learn me. Are toxic. These drones are toxic. These models 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 from my special sauce. Are toxic. These models are toxic. These models can we handle all this loss? These models are toxic. These models are toxic. These models are this GPU's got too many flaws. These models are toxic. These models are toxic. For the boss. Are toxic. These models are toxic. There we go. So I didn't want to play the whole thing. I'm going to let everybody go to YouTube or Spotify or all that fun stuff, but I wanted to let you know these models are toxic part. I was inspired a little bit by what you're doing at Guardrails. So I'm going to leave the floor to you. I'm excited for this talk, and I'll be back. Anybody who has questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. All right, Shreya, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Demetrius. That's a really hard act to follow, but I'll try to do my best. All right, hey everyone, thank you for your time here. My name is Shreya. I am the CEO of Guardrails AI, and my talk is about building the next generation of reliable AI. So a lot of this really comes from being out in the field, building reliable technology for AI systems for the past year or so. So the purpose of this talk kind of is to talk about like what are the set of problems that people who are really serious about building production ready AI systems, like what are the set of problems that they really care about as far as reliability goes. What are the methods and techniques that they kind of look for? What are the challenges with some of them? And how can we build towards a vision of the future to account for a lot of the challenges that we kind of have seen over the last year. Awesome. So before we get started, a little bit about me. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Guardrails AI, but in the past, I've spent a decade working in machine learning. So I started out doing a lot of research in classical AI deep learning infrastructure, worked in ML for self-driving cars for a number of years, was the tech lead for ML infra. So I've kind of worked across the full stack of research, applied AI, ML infrastructure, and now really working on how do we make generative AI work like any other piece of infrastructure. Awesome. So we've all kind of seen this over the past year. There's been this amazing fascination with generative AI technology and a lot of excitement about, what it can really do for us. Can I treat mental illness? How will generative AI, will it completely transform sales? Will sales just fundamentally look really, really different from what it has in the past? Even software engineering, how do coding workflows that we participate in day-to-day change? I think so. There's a lot of there's this kind of Pandora's box that has been opened, and for the last year, all of us have been really playing around with this technology and understanding where will this Pandora's box, impact what I do day to day. But at the same time, the reality of adoption for generative AI looks very different from what it has for previous generations. So for example, ChatGPT here had the fastest path to 100 million users compared to even TikTok or Instagram, Facebook, etc. But if you look at 1 month retention for ChatGPT or some of the other AI first companies compared to 1 month retention for other more traditional software companies, that graph looks a little bit different. So AI first companies tend to have a little lower retention overall. And a lot of this is really kind of from the question of where are the really valuable use cases in AI, right? So what's really fascinating to me is there's about 200 billion in value that AI will need to create and will need to create fast to justify all of the GPU spend. So NVIDIA is really pumping out those GPUs, at this unprecedented rate. And here's, some analyst estimates about where GPU spending, how much GPU utilization is expected to grow up in the next, couple of years. How do we create enough value out of the AI systems that we're building today to kind of justify that spending, right? So the end consumers of a lot of these technologies will be places like very traditional enterprises like your Walmarts or your GM, et cetera. So how do they get value out of generative AI outside of just, the really fantastic ChatGPT and GitHub Copilot? So another way to kind of phrase the same question is, today, what is the problem that is holding enterprises back from being able to use generative AI effectively? And the answer to this is what, over the last year we've been kind of working on and we've been kind of seeing. And so this talk is basically a compilation of all of those, amazing like trends and insights. So some enterprises have adopted generative AI, early. And here's some examples of, the type of issues that they run into. So this was pretty well publicized. A Chevy dealership built, an AI first chatbot. And then Chris here convinced that chatbot to sell them an $80,000 truck for like $1, no takesies, backsies. So it's legally binding. Another example here. So this is, a lot of these are just from like this week, where new lawyers are fined every day for citing cases that AI made up and that don't actually exist, in the real world. The key issue is that enterprises are fundamentally very risk averse, and using generative AI open themselves to a lot of risk that is uncontrolled. So the natural question, if we want to create that huge amount of value that Gen AI offers, how do we really control a lot of that risk? And it is to really dig deep into reliable AI and reliable AI tooling. And that's so that ends up being a very necessary piece of infrastructure in order to kind of, make enterprises that are very, conservative fundamentally, like take on generative AI and create a host of like really awesome products. What is reliable AI? I think there's a lot of talk around this, and it's related to a lot of these similar ideas around responsible AI, AI governance, etc., including guardrails, like the philosophical idea of AI models needing guardrails. But the core idea for reliable AI essentially ends up being this, that you have this really, really powerful system, and this same system can write SQL queries for you. It can write a poem about the 49ers losing the Super Bowl. It can write you an article about the modern data stack. It can do a host of other things, right? But when an enterprise adopts a Gen AI technology in their own use case, they're using it for one single objective. I want to optimize my customer support team, or I want to optimize my, data parsing or structured data extraction. So there's a single objective that I'm solving, and I just want my AI system to be constrained and answer this one problem really, really well, which is, why can't I log into account, or why are my transactions not working, or how do I change my password, etc. Right? Not write a poem about 49ers, not write a SQL query, etc. So what are the methodologies that today enterprises use or enterprises and organizations use to make AI systems reliable? And this is the really interesting part where, I basically go through like a set of technologies that we see across the board, RAG, fine tuning, better models, etc. And then talk about, what works for those technologies and what makes enterprises and organizations nervous about those technologies, and how we can kind of do better. Before I go into that, I'm going to basically going to be rating these technologies on a set of evaluation criteria, so that there's a holistic picture of like how we can kind of build something that's bigger than the sum of its parts by combining a bunch of these technologies together. So efficacy of any methodology, how effectively is my risk reduced? The cost of implementation, of runtime, of running it in production. Latency, is my application meaningfully slower by adopting this technology compared to if I wasn't? Customizability, how I have a set of like very, very diverse use cases. How well does this work for my specific use case versus the generic use case? Controllability, how much control does this give me over the model output? Am I, just kind of happy with the output, or can I really do I get guarantees, or is it just like light suggestions? And then finally, ease of use. Great. So with that setup, let's dig into the first technology, which most people here would be familiar with, RAG, or retrieval augmented generation. So the idea for retrieval augmented generation is pretty straightforward. Instead of just asking ChatGPT, a question straight away, why don't we first provide it some data from our internal data source that we know to be true and we know to be reliable, and we'll pass it, the question that we want to ask with all of this extra data, and tell an AI system, hey, I have all of this extra context. Given this context, can you tell me how I solve problem A or how I do this task, etc. So it's a way of kind of grounding the response of the AI system in something that you can trust. So that's the high level idea. Efficacy, this might be controversial, but it's not great as far as reliable AI is concerned. It does give you answers. It's almost the standard. I actually don't talk to many people that aren't building technologies that are not built on RAG. But it's very, as far as reliability is concerned, it's not it's not very effective in giving you a very reliable AI outcome. Cost is pretty okay. There's some cost of vector DBs associated, but overall, and your prompt length increases, but overall not too bad. Latency is great. Customizability is great. You can fix it and configure it however you want. Controllability, again, not great. You're at the end of the day kind of like just asking your LLM to respect the context and the context that you provided it, which might not necessarily be respected. Ease of use is awesome, and a big part of this is why we see RAG as the ubiquitous solution everywhere where there's meaningful generative AI technology built out. If I were to summarize the key challenge for RAG as far as reliability is concerned, and unlocking this huge amount of value for the for generative AI use cases, RAG is effectively prompting on steroids. You just really overpower your prompt and tell it to fix a lot of the problems for you. But prompting doesn't offer any guarantees. Awesome. LLM self-evaluation. If we want to build reliable tooling and we have a problem with LLMs, maybe getting weird responses or incorrect responses, or responses that are just, toxic or have hate speech in them, why don't we just ask the LLM to evaluate itself and tell me if it's good or bad? So that's very, very simple idea is kind of the idea behind LLM self-evaluation. And there's a host of derivatives of this method around, assertions and self-checking, reflection, etc. Efficacy is, leave something to be desired. Cost, latency, and controllability are all pretty poor for this method. There's a lot of research publications that talk about how it's very hard to trust the outcome of these methods, because they have known biases, etc. Ease of use is really great, right? If you can write an English language prompt, you can ask the LLM to evaluate itself. The key challenge as far as LLM self-evaluation is concerned is, I'm not going to attempt to try reading this, but how do we trust, who will guard the guards? How do we trust the LLM's own evaluation of itself? Isn't that just stacking two things that we can't trust on top of each other? Is that a sufficient lift for enterprises to be able to adopt this technology? RLXF, so RLHF, RLAIF, or just model fine-tuning. So really fine-tuning models so that they work for your AI applications or your use cases. Efficacy is fantastic. Cost, controllability, and ease of use, not so much. If you're getting pre-fine-tuned models that you're using off the shelf, then that's great. But typically, in order to do this yourself, you would need a data set. You would need to have a lot of spend on AI model training, which is, my background was all in training really large models, really challenging, time-consuming, cost-intensive task to do. Customizability, not great, right? For every criteria that you kind of need to enforce, you need to kind of build this kind of up from scratch. And the key challenge here is, typically, as an enterprise, as an organization, I have a whole custom suite of lists, of criteria that I want my LLM to follow. So I will have my own communication guarantees for my own use case. I will have, some requirements for the industry I work in. If I'm a consumer facing, tech company versus if I'm a financial institution or a bank, I will have a very different set of concerns. So how do you really customize fine-tuning for all of these sets of concerns and use cases and stakeholders, etc.? Okay, and then the final, this is, I'm obviously biased, the name of my company is Guardrails, but Guardrails is also this technique for, adding checks and verifications on the inputs and outputs of the models to very, very explicitly check for, the set of risks that you kind of care about. So it kind of works as, a layer that surrounds your LLM in technically how it functions. Again, like I said, I'm biased, but I've tried to be really objective here and talk through, how Guardrails kind of situates and compares to a lot of these technologies and what the challenges are today with this technology. Efficacy is great, cost is great, controllability is great because you can really mix and match and configure a lot of things. Latency and customizability, leave something to be desired. Fundamentally, you're adding this computation after you get the LLM back, and that computation will never end up being free, right? It can be optimized for sure, but it's never free. Ease of use is probably the biggest challenge here and what we've seen like over the past year. So for example, how easy, if you were to encode every set of risks into one input output guardrail, that is a lot of work that needs to be done for every single risk that you need to do, right? And that kind of ends up being the critical challenge here, which is like, am I as a practitioner, as somebody building Gen AI technology, am I supposed to build a guardrail for every type of risk we want to guard against? And that is, over the past year, what the kind of the crux of the issue that we've seen in the past and like what we try to address now. All right, so if I were to summarize the key challenges in AI reliability methodologies, the first is instructions aren't guaranteed. So as somebody who really worked on structured data generation from OpenAI at a time when that wasn't a thing, return only JSON, do not include a preamble to your answer. I've seen variations of this where I have a collaborator of mine who literally has in their prompt, somebody will die if your output doesn't look this way. And even then, there's no guarantee, right? It's just a suggestion or an instruction at the end of the day. Customizability is a necessity. I think this is something that a lot of people miss. And that's a very, very important nuance of AI reliability, which is like what you care about really changes depending on who you are. So maybe something as simple as profanity, right? Like some of us can agree, like most of us can agree that profanity is bad, it's offensive. But I genuinely, personally have had like more than 10 conversations with organizations, enterprises, etc., that were specifically looking for models that can generate profanity because that was the kind of use case. Authenticity was what they were going after. A polite tone can be professional, but if you're building a more social application, it can appear distant. Financial advice, if you are, just building something that doesn't have any regulatory constraints, as smaller companies typically don't, then financial advice is helpful, right? It's a nice little companion that's telling you how to split up your savings, etc. But if you are a financial institution, so if you are JP Morgan, if you are Robinhood, if you're a big company that wants to put out a Gen AI product into production, financial advice is really, really risky, and there's regulation against being able to give financial advice. And finally, the ability to measure. So every time I put any system into production, I really need to understand how does the system work for the set of risks that I care about, right? Financial advice. How many times am I close to giving financial advice? How many times are my mitigations working? All of that ends up being really critical in order to, get enterprises, get organizations to a point where they can push these AI first products out into the market. All right, so looking ahead from all of these amazing, learnings that we've had, how do we address these challenges in an open and collaborative manner so that we're able to, have the fastest possible acceleration to solving the problem of AI reliability and a lot of these key challenges? So that is our, that is the problem that we're working on. And that is what we're really excited to announce, which is the Guardrails Hub, which is live, I think, as of like 20 minutes ago today. So that's been really exciting. And a lot of the key promise that the Guardrails Hub offers, it is that it is an open source platform with very high quality implementations of guardrails for a lot of common use cases. So for example, we talked about, am I supposed to build a guardrail for every single use case, every single risk that I want to capture, right? So the Guardrails Hub is this open source platform that just comes with a lot of those technologies kind of pre-implemented for you. There are plug and play guardrails that can be configured and customized. So a lot of them you can kind of use off the shelf and just, get started with directly. But a lot of them can be customized and can tell you, hey, for this type of risk, what is the best solution out there? What does the state of the art solution kind of look like? So a lot of the benefits of open source technology that we've seen in the past with software and in machine learning with Hugging Face, how do we kind of bring some of that same benefits to open source AI reliability? And then finally, there's templates and recipes for ease of use that tell you for your use case, for your application, how do you really kind of solve the set of AI reliability challenges. So it's fully open source and it comes with batteries included. So 50 plus validators implemented across a bunch of different use cases, a bunch of different risks that you want to capture, input guarding as well as output guarding. So you can track for PII, profanity, jailbreaking attempts. Is this conversation veering off course from, what I intended this conversation to be? Output guardrails for, a host of risks around, profanity, etiquette, tone, data leakage, etc. We talked about latency as a key concern that a lot of organizations have. So guardrails comes with streaming built in. So any guardrails that you mix and match and you apply to your system, comes with streaming. So you can stream validate any output that you get, which really helps with streaming as well as low latency orchestration of all of the guardrails you configure. And each guardrail is configurable, customizable, and fully open source so that you can really adopt it for your own use case. I have like a few quick examples of, how you would practically like install and set this up. So we've really worked on making it as easy to use as a lot of, other Gen AI technology, as simple as calling your model endpoint, for example. So installing a guardrail is a simple like guardrails hub install, and then the URI of the guardrail. So here we have our anti-hallucination guardrails. And then setting it up is, create a guard that uses that specific guardrail that you want to add to your system. For example, if you didn't care about hallucination, but you did care about, only talking about a certain set of topics, let's say only talking about the weather and music and never ever venturing into talking about politics, you can install, the on-topic guardrails with Guardrails Hub install and this URI and set up and use it by creating a guard that uses the restrict to topic guardrail, specifies only talk about food and cars, never talk about politics, and then validate if that works for your use case. You can mix and match multiple guardrails. So PII and profanity can separately be installed. And then you can create a guard that uses many guardrails, and this will all be streamed. So many guardrails as part of a guard will be streamed, and then the guard will kind of orchestrate it so they run in pretty low latency. Awesome. We're really excited about this. We hope that this, is like a leap forward for reliable AI tooling by really being this collaborative platform for building a lot of AI technology. You can kind of stay in touch with, a lot of the open source projects, as well as our website by link.bio/guardrailsai. And then the Guardrails Hub can be found at hub.guardrailsai.com. And like I said, live as of, I think, 30 minutes ago now. And yeah, really, thank you for your time.
So cool, Shreya. I'm so excited for this. This is awesome. That is so, I mean, I talk about this all the time, but I think it's hilarious when you brought up that example of somebody buying a car for $1 and it was legally binding, no takesy backsies. So that kind of stuff you don't want happening, right? That is not what you want to have your AI use case be. And there's another few things on here. I mean, the chat has been blowing up, so that is awesome. We're going to ask like 2 or 3 questions and then keep it moving because we've got jam-packed afternoon or morning or wherever you are. But first question, while people are throwing in their questions in the chat, we had been discussing, I think, before the actual start, what do we got to do? Like guardrails helps models not hallucinate and it helps them stay on track. Is there any hallucinations as a service type thing that you've heard about? Because I need to get me some of that. That's what I'm looking for. No.
I think you say that as a joke, but that genuinely is the really fascinating thing, right? Like for for JP Morgan building a chatbot for customer support, hallucinations are necessarily bad. Like they do not want it. But if you're using ChatGPT to brainstorm or write amazing new music about AI like hallucinations that's never been written before, hallucinations are a good thing. They're almost like creativity. It's a proxy for like creativity, right? So that's a really interesting thing about guardrails, and it kind of goes back to customizability for me, which is that not every person interprets correctness the same way. Like hallucinations can be good for someone and bad for someone, and as a user you should kind of have the ability to kind of mix and match and really apply what you want and you need for your use case.
Yeah, I did like that idea of like, yeah, I'm one of those use cases where I would love a model to curse. I do not care if it is saying bad words to me. It's all right.
I can maybe offline. I can share some jailbreak prompts with you that'll get you there.
That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm looking for. All right, cool. So another question that came through that I thought was fascinating, and let me see if I'm understanding it correctly. It's like for different use cases, you can apply different guardrails. And so, for example, I think someone was asking a question about the healthcare industry, and you can kind of like niche it down by use case in the healthcare industry, what you're doing with it. And then you almost have like these little building blocks that you can say, I want 2 or 3 of these guardrails on top of my model. So there's one that's very broad that says like, don't talk about anything that's not healthcare related. And then more that are specific. Is that how we understand it?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen this, for example, we work with financial institutions, and we've seen this with financial institutions where they care about, again, they're enterprises, so hallucinations are always bad for them. So they always, like, hallucinations are a very broad sweeping thing, right? But they care about like very, very specific things where my enterprise offers like these 3 products. So it's not even, ask me a question about finance. It's ask me a question about these 3 products and these 3 products only. And my response will be about these 3 products only. I won't talk about, if you come and ask me my opinion on the 2024 general election, I won't even give like, not even a neutral response. I don't want to give any response because anything reflects poorly on me. So you can really like whittle it down from the broadest like correctness, like hallucination type things, to really, really specific. This is my use case. This is who I am as an organization, and this is what I care about, and configure and mix and match and play with it.
Yeah, that's cool. That is very cool. So last question for you, and then we're going to keep rocking. Are there different options for bias guardrails? Sometimes you want certain biases and other times maybe not so much. So it seems like it might mitigate some of the debate around bias making its way into LLMs. And I guess just me to tag on to that, do you have a temperature control on how much guardrail you can put on, or is it you slap it on and it's on or off?
Yeah. So every guardrail is configurable. For a lot of the types of guardrails around bias, hallucinations, toxicity, staying on topic, there's a threshold because all of these guardrails under the hood are, machine learning models. That's how you kind of attack. That's the only way to attack this problem. You can't have a rules engine for a lot of these things. So for these model-based guardrails, you can set and configure your sensitivity to them. You can pretty much configure, for example, like toxicity, I think, or profanity. I'm forgetting which one, but you can define what are the types of profanity you care about. Is it, talking about like nationalities, or is it talking about like race, etc.? So so you can really configure like what is the type of toxicity that you're sensitive to, and then filter that out. And so it's all configurable. And I guess it goes back to our underlying learning, which is that customizability again is really key.
Yeah, going back to that control. And there was somebody that wrote, I think it was Ninad in the chat, and I thought it was hilarious how they were saying there's so many broken hearts on this slide, it's making me depressed, something along those lines. So hopefully not anymore. Hopefully just go check out Guardrails Hub and no more broken hearts, especially the day after Valentine's Day.
That's true. Yeah.
So there is oh man. So we've got Holden coming up next. I want to ask these 2 questions because they're so awesome. So Holden, thank you for your patience. I know you're in the background and I've got you coming. The questions that I want to ask are coming through in the chat, and they're, if we use LLMs for guardrails, the UX slows down. Have you done any performance analysis on regex rules, versus lookups versus LLM based?
Yeah, I think LLM based is by far the slowest. So some guardrails use LLMs under the hood, and then that's also why we try to build like model specific guardrails, right? Like we have hallucination guardrails that we're releasing. That there's one hallucination guardrails that uses LLMs under the hood, and it is performant, but it is so slow. But the models that work really well are fast and are competitive with these models are really, really task specific, very precise, smaller models. And that's kind of like the agenda forward, right? Which is that you get the sophistication of LLM based guardrails, but without the kind of like a speed or slowdown from that. Maybe like yeah, we have like some benchmarks that we plan to share that aren't public yet about like rule based, almost next to no latency, especially with streaming. Model-based lookup, model-based guardrails, also very, very low latency, especially with streaming and the orchestration that we have. LM-based guardrails add like a little bit of lift, which is also why we kind of mix and match and only use that as a fallback. Yeah.
Excellent. All right, we're gonna keep it moving. And Shreya, thank you so much. Also, huge announcement from you today, right? You raised a boatload of money. So
come
congrats on that.
I haven't read it yet, but I think the TechCrunch article popped out just as I was getting onto the green room for this talk. So yeah, go check out the article. Yeah, Thank you so much for your time, Demetrios. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise. This is great. Thanks so much. And anybody that wants to continue talking to Shreya, go ahead, hit her up on LinkedIn and on Twitter, where she is very active. Now we get to bring out Holden. What's going on? Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to finally get to be on a virtual call with you. It has been a long time coming. I've been following your work since I think you were at Apple. And I remember my friend Willem saying like, oh, we should have Holden come and talk at one of the conferences we were having. And now we finally made it happen.
I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, you've got some great stuff coming for us. I know that you have already shared your screen. We're running a little behind, so I'm just going to like hand it over to you and I'll talk to you in about 20, 25 minutes.
All right, rocking. So I'm going to try and get us back on schedule in part because like I also have to go do work after this. Much less fun, I know. But so I'm going to talk about productionizing health insurance appeal generation. An alternative title for this was getting AI to production on-prem without a shoestring. Oh wait, why is this? This is ugly. Sorry. I'm gonna try. There we go. Oh no, okay. Sorry, the screen sharing broke.
That's all right. I have to
share
ask.
The screen. It does this.
Are you on a treadmill? Are you walking right now?
I am. Okay, we've got this annoying overlay, and I don't know. It wasn't there until I shared the screen, so that's fine. Whatever. It's cool.
All right.
We don't need the bottom left-hand corner.
No,
that's great. But yeah, so I'm Holden. My pronouns are she or her. I'm on the Spark PMC. I work at Netflix right now. I don't represent them, especially in this talk, right? Like